Well, I want to welcome everybody to the Empowered Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamoni, and I'm an acceptance coach that helps people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover their self-acceptance and step into their personal power. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories along with practical tools and actionable insights to help guide you along your healing journey. Today, we'll explore the hidden gifts, lessons, and blessings inside grief that can empower you to reclaim your life and create an inspiring future. And today, I'd like to introduce everybody to our guest, Kathy. She loves helping baby boomer women and others feel empowered with their finances. She's relived the stress of not having enough money to make ends meet. That's been a big part of her story as she's traveled through grief. And what she does is she teaches people how to invest in their futures and for emergencies, all while building confidence in their finances. And so, without further ado, I'd love to introduce Kathy. Thanks for being a part of the podcast today.
Hey, Chris, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to help other people along the way.
Yeah, well, I'm really grateful because last week you and I connected about your story, just about your mother passing away and also going through a very difficult divorce that had a lot of financial challenges and really set you up in a place to help everybody learn how to be empowered with their finances. And so I don't want to ruin the story. I want to hand that over to you so you can share that with everyone. And so I'm going to give you the floor.
Okay, well, the first thing was when anybody gets married, you don't go in thinking I'm going to get divorced. It's till death do you part, and I meant that every time. It's like it's till death do us part. Um, Sadly, my first marriage was till death do us part, but we divorced before then, and that was the hardest thing I could have taken. Right before our 10th anniversary, he was complaining about severe headaches, and the doctors would just give him, like Tylenol, codeine, or Darvon, or just kick it up. But one day after I left for work before him, because I'm a teacher, and then he left later, he didn't never made it to work that day. He actually collapsed on the bathroom floor with such pain in his head that I think he took himself to the ER, and they did a CAT scan, and that's when they found the brain tumor. And by this time, it was the size of an avocado pit. And once they did the biopsy, then they had to do surgery. It was inoperable. It was the base of his hypothalamus. So he was given 3 to 5 years to live. And that was the hardest thing right before our 10th anniversary vows. We already set up to redo our vows in the backyard. We were all excited. His mother-in-law made my dress, and everything was, life was good for us until this one point. Um, and it was just a hard blow to take. When the doctor told me he had 3 to 5 years, I asked, because I'm like, it's shocking me, like 3 to 5 years shorter than what he would have lived. And he goes, no, 3 to 5 years left to live. And I'm looking, at thinking about my, I think, 4 and 5 year old at that time. I'm like, who in the hell is going to want me with two preteen kids? And it was, to this beautiful life we had, just having it told it's going to be wiped away was the biggest emotional mess I ever could have gone through. And it was just sad,
I think that's a really hard place for people to be. It's interesting to have you talk about this on this episode, because I've been watching Breaking Bad lately on TV, and the show is loosely premised on the fact of the main character getting diagnosed with a rare lung cancer and being given 2 years to live. And you watch the upheaval in the family over that and what kind of dynamics came out of that. Explain a little bit about that process when you guys got that news. I know you said it was really hard and just kind of hit you a lot. Did you have periods of numbness and periods of, thinking that there's not really a way out? Or did you start thinking about, how are we going to start making a way forward with this?
The initial thing, I think I would describe myself as a zombie. I was functioning but not aware of what I was doing. I would, after a couple of days, I'd go to work while he's still in the hospital in ICU. I'd After work, I'd go visit him at the hospital, and then I'd come home, and my mother had taken the kids from school and was at home with them. And then I'd come home and I'd be a zombie and talk to them, but I was like, I was numb. I mean, I wasn't really functioning right. And once that all settled in, and once he came home, we started looking into, because we're here in California, we looked into City of Hope, and people that we knew were helping us reach out to all kinds of cancer, new theories, new this, new that, things to try. Maybe it's not inoperable after all. And after exhausting all of that, it set in that what it was what it was. He had 3 to 5 years to live, and I insist we told the kids it's not fair to them to, if it be 3 years, not tell them, and them not do things they would have wanted to do, even though they were so young. It was hard. So we went into the hospital. He was at Pomona Valley, and they have a really good cancer care. It's just grown exponentially, and they're like one of the leading hospitals. And we got into a cancer care group, and we went to meetings together, hearing other people's stories, and that helped. It helped knowing that you're not the only one. I mean, you
Hmm.
kind of isolate yourself and you think you're the only one, because none of your immediate friends are going through this. But when you meet other people who are, it helps a little bit. And there, some are where you're at, some are way ahead, some are like probably a month from dying. And you just hear the things they go to, and how to plan, and you just try to do the best you can. But it doesn't console you in any means, at least from my end, to knowing I'm going to be losing my husband. And that was probably the first grief I had at that point.
Talk to me a little bit about, so you had a family at that point. You had two daughters, if I remember right.
Yeah.
Um, Tell me a little bit about that acceptance journey, because I know I went through cancer myself with my grandfather. He was terminal, and there was nothing we could do that was going to fix this blood cancer because it would just come back no matter how much chemo you gave it. And so I wanted to ask you about that acceptance journey for yourself and maybe with your husband as well, how you guys got to that place of this is just reality of what is, and what was that like, as far as your children? Because I know cancer can be really tough on preteen children at that point that don't really have a grasp on that whole thing and understand it fully. What was that process like for you guys as a family, and how did you guys, get to that place of acceptance?
Well, I don't ugh, I don't know if you can ever really accept something like that. It's quite a blow. You navigate it the best you can. And like I said, they were like 4 and 5 or something. So they were like in kindergarten and first grade. So we notified their school about what had happened. And the girls may act out or feel sad or break out crying for no reason if they thought of this. Is after we told them, which was relatively soon. Um, Kids are resilient and they seem to handle it okay, but by the time they got to high school, I saw that wasn't the case, especially with my youngest daughter. By this time, when he died, and we were going through divorce at this time, but when he died, she took it extremely hard. Um, and that was hard to watch. She started getting tattoos everywhere, and they were supposedly in remembrance of him. And I would get so angry at them even doing this. And they were underage, so they had a friend go do it, which made me even madder. So everybody expresses their grief in different ways. And that was just, it was hard seeing your kids hurt. And I had them in counseling. I was in counseling because by this time I'm thinking, who's going to want me being a single parent, the whole pity party with kids that are preteens, because that's like the worst age. Although my kids were, everybody loved them, they started changing. And by the time they were teens, there was things as an adult you focus on because it's the best you know what to focus on. So I kind of neglected them a little bit. And in exchange for that little bit of neglect, they started talking back and snapping back that they've never done before. And then that was hard to navigate on top of going through divorce at this time. It just was one hard blow after another. Um, I mean,
Yeah,
I was lost. All I could do was go to counseling because I didn't know what else to do. And that helped a lot. It calmed me down, but it still didn't take away the pain because you're still going through the pain of everything you're going through. And so on top of losing a husband, going through what ended up being a bitter divorce, his family carried it on and that made it even worse. So there was no contact with the in-laws. As my daughters got older, the younger one latched onto them, and I'm glad she did. She still does things with them. And actually, I've seen one of his sisters. He came from a large family, and I can talk to them. I'm at the point where I can talk to them, but there was things that were done that were incomprehensible as far as what he had left that I should have received that I didn't, that the girls or should receive. And they were in his handwritten will on his deathbed that they were to receive, and they never got a dime of his money. His sisters went to Europe, and I don't know what else they did with it. So that was really sad. It was just so much hurt and pain came out of it. And you don't know how people are going to react when they're told they're going to die. Um, My husband was an ex-Marine and he was at the top of the class. He did like ranks, more than a rank a year. He was very good at what he did and personable. He was on the US volleyball team through the military. Um, and after actually the year he got diagnosed, he went with the team to Europe to play, but he couldn't play because of his circumstance, but he was still there to support the team. And he was expert marksman. He had all these medals on his chest above his rank level. And he was just always had like the golden spoon in his hand. And then to be told he was going to die, it totally changed his mentality. I was still in it till death do us part, and I would have done what I could. But his mentality changed so that besides the hurt of losing my husband, while I did have him, mentally he was pushing me away. And that really hurt that I could cry in bed next to him and he would never even acknowledge it, like it wasn't happening. And you don't know what's going through your head until you're in their shoes. You don't know. I mean, you mentioned your grandfather. You don't know how he felt. You may have talked to him and heard him, but you don't know inside how he felt. I don't know if people share that because my husband certainly didn't share with me. Um, I knew he was angry and upset.
Yeah.
It's something for the first time in his life he couldn't do, but he was pushing everybody and everything away.
I
And
think that's a big challenge that a lot of people have. I saw that in the cancer ward when I went with my grandfather on treatments of things. You made a really good point. When we're not the one with the cancer, we're not the one who just got told our life's getting cut short because of this disease. We don't know what's going on in their head, and I'm glad you brought that up because my grandfather, after that cancer diagnosis, he changed. He really became very quiet, very withdrawn, very. I could tell he was in his head, and I never, even to this day, I still don't know what he was thinking. I don't know what he was playing in his mind. You've always had this cry and want to help or do something or change the circumstance. We're fixers in life, is what I like to say. And unfortunately, with people that go through that, it's a very individual journey. And grief itself, by the way, the grief you went through, being pushed away by your husband too. You're grieving him in that space. You're also grieving through the divorce. You're grieving through his loss. You're getting hit from multiple areas of that. And that's really tough to navigate.
yeah, I say it's more than anybody should have to deal with in a lifetime. And it was definitely a struggle for me, you know, finding I'm going to lose him, then being pushed away by him, then having him rip me apart, threatening to have me live in the streets, to stealing my support checks in the mailbox. So it was almost true. It was just, it was overwhelming. I mean, I can honestly say counseling help. I know it helped a little bit, but looking back, no one can take away what you're going through. No one can change somebody. I was in there till death do us part, and I fully intended to stay there. But when emotionally I was meant to feel worthless, why am I hanging on to this for? And there's people on both sides of the fence. Did I do right? Did I do wrong? But you can only do what you think is right. And I even told him, you can live in the house. I just mentally have to be divorced from you because I'm not treated as a wife and I'm hurting. I'm breaking. I'm like crying in bed next to night, wanting to hold you, and you want nothing to do with me. That was so hard that I said, I'll move downstairs in the guest room. You can stay in the master bedroom. And that wasn't good enough. And that was the beginning of the hell through divorce, let's say. So it was hard.
Well, you bring up, a lot of good points about grief, especially in this circumstance where there's cancer involved. There's also a loss involved with that, and I think that, in my experience too, and I experienced similar things that you went through, not to the magnitude you did, but I watched how when we lose someone that we're very, very close to, whether that be a husband, a grandparent, even a parent, at that matter. I always say death brings out the worst in us for some reason, and I don't know why, other than we're all experiencing this myriad of emotions. And I'm sure you felt a plethora of things, from anger and sadness to loss and shame and blame and guilt, all those things flying around all at once. And I think when we lose somebody, um we're watching the most permanent thing in life that we can't take back, we can't change, we can't transform it. Death is permanent and it will never be anything other than that. And so our whole world kind of collapses at that point. Everything we thought was solid, everything we thought that we knew was where things were going to be or what direction we were going to go, even our future life, is all of a sudden gone. And now we're left with what I like to call, we're left with the broken, shattered glass on the floor. How do we put this back together? There's a Japanese art of when ceramic pieces break, the Japanese don't throw it away. They actually take gold and put it back together, refire it in a kiln. It becomes a brand new object. And I think there's a lot of symbolism for that through the grief process that we ourselves, just like you said, you were almost brought to your knees by this, but financially, emotionally, mentally, you got broken down so hard. And I remember you sharing the story with me too, that there was a time you and your daughters were literally scraping by to get by. It was rough for quite a while. I'd love for you to
Yeah.
share a little bit about that and how you overcame that, because I thought that was a really powerful aspect of your story.
If I'm thinking when you're talking about like after church, I mean, I literally couldn't afford anything. There was no soda, no things like that in the house, just the bare necessities. And after church, I like to treat them. But even back then, when a foot long Subway sandwich was $5, it was $5 I didn't have. So we would get bottles and cans along the road, go turn them in, and then use that money to go buy a Subway sandwich, and the girls would split it. They were young enough, they only needed half, but just things like that, or I don't know, was that what you were thinking of? The
Yeah, I just found that story empowering because a lot of people go through financial hardships. It doesn't matter what stage of life, and I mean a lot of people right now are suffering in this country right now just based on where the economy is at with having some people I've talked to are working two, three jobs just trying to get by and scraping the bottom of the barrel just to get by. And I thought that it was a real testament when I heard your story because you shared that after when your husband passed, the money situation kind of fell apart. You talked about support checks being stolen. You talked about really not having that will followed through with after his passing, and you just were in that place where things were very, very hard. And I commended you for the things you did, like you said about picking up cans and making money that way. Like you always found a way, and you shared that perseverance with me with your story when we met. And
yeah,
I
well,
found that really empowering.
when you have kids, you don't want them to feel poor or without. I mean, I grew up very poor. I grew up in the house my mother grew up in that was handed down from my grandmother. So that's all I knew. And I knew I didn't have two parents like all my friends had two parents. So I knew I didn't have the things they did, but I never felt poor as far as I had clothes to wear. I had hand-me-downs that I thought were better than what we could have afforded to buy, things like that. But with my girls, they had clothes. We were always shopping at low end stores. I never actually discovered the thrift store thing, which probably would have been sheer genius, but never discovered that. But it was just tough. And to want to give them a treat to go out, because I did not go out. They didn't go out. They were still a little young, but to give them some sense and making a game of finding who can find the most bottles and cans, you turn in the simplest stuff and then take it to the recycling place, then go back and you buy that foot long sandwich and they feel like they're like in heaven. They got to go out to eat, which is something I won't take that from them. I mean, it's just like I remember we were at a timeshare vacation once when he was still alive, and each of them got to bring a friend. And I saw the cute, and I'll never forget this. My girls will never forget it either. You know how they have like the duck crossing signs, the yellow duck crossing signs?
Yeah.
Well, this was inside the complex. And I saw the sign, and I happened to see on the other side of the road ducks crossing towards our side, a mama duck and like five baby ducks. And I said, hey, girls, let's just stop and see what happens. So I stopped, and sure enough, the ducks crossed in front. It was just the biggest thrill to see ducks cross in front of the house. Just little things like that you make them feel special. Putting a bubble bath in the jacuzzi tub and have it flow all over with them and the four little girls in the jacuzzi. I mean, it's just the little things you can do that don't cost you anything or cost you very little, just to give them some happiness is great. I mean, I couldn't even afford to send them to church camp. I had to get later on, I swallowed my pride like my mother did many times in us growing up. And I actually asked for help to send my girls to camp. And they actually had accounts where people donate for people that couldn't afford to go. So they actually got to go to church camp a couple times, which I was happy to do. But these are things you don't think of that make a kid's life that you can't afford. You do what you can to try to do it. And picking bottles and cans, I made a game out of it, and they were grateful for that Subway sandwich. So it was nice to see a smile on their face amongst everything that was happening in their life. It was happening to them too, and it was just sad to see.
Well, I think you taught them a lot of valuable lessons along the way. I really do. And I'm glad that you brought that up and shared that story today because when I look back on my memories too as a child, I'm reminded of exactly what you talked about because my I never understood why my grandfather was so stingy growing up. I never like understood it because my family never really talked about money. They never talked about how it works and the purpose of it, and it was always just from this limited mindset, and I never understood. So one day, I asked my grandpa kind of in a roundabout way about like, how did you grow up? Like what was your story? And he told me he grew up in Minnow, North Dakota, way up in the northern end of it. And back in the day in the 30s, he grew up in the Dust Bowl when people literally had nothing. I mean, we're spoiled today with smartphones and cars and grocery store 2 blocks down the street. We're spoiled with that. He didn't have that growing up. His mom had to can food every winter. They had to hunt for meat as a town together in the winter to survive. If you got a pair of socks and clothes for Christmas, you were good. There was no Xbox or any of that fun stuff.
Yeah.
And so I had a new appreciation for him. And, I still remember my grandfather one day when I wanted something when I was a teenager, I was 13. And I remember my mom was always Mrs. like buy me anything I want kind of thing. And anyway, he lost his mind one day. And he pulled me aside and he said, "You're done with your mom buying you stuff. That's it. You're done." He said, "If you want stuff, go get a job." And I was like, "What? Like, how am I supposed to do that?" And he goes, "Go get a job." And I, and I thought it was cold or whatever, but I started selling Christmas trees in a parking lot at 13 years old under the table. And I worked for things. And my grandfather taught me the value of money that year. And so I share this because your story is very, very powerful in that sense. And those memories that you created with your daughters, with the Subway sandwiches, with the jacuzzi tub, things like that, the ducks, those things are what they're going to remember. And those are the moments that are going to be the most cherished in their life. It's not going to be the things they buy or they go to the store and get whatever fancy thing. It's not going to be about that. It's always going to be looking back on those times where you had nothing and that was what you had. That creates those memories that keep you going in life. So I think there's a lot to be said about that, that people overlook those moments in life, especially in the grief process. We overlook those small things that don't cost anything, but they end up being the most memorable aspects of our life.
Yeah. It's and being but poor, my grandma was a seamstress and she used to take flour sacks and make my aunt's clothes out of the flour sacks. And
Whoa.
when my mom was raising us, like I said, we realized we were in the same, we grew up in the house my mother grew up in, and she'd tell us stories about how grandma used to, she'd have a cross like I do, and it would be backwards, and some guy would turn it over. My grandmother would go up and slap the guy for being fresh with my mother, and he was just turning around across. This is how old school, but my grandma grew up like maybe your grandfather. They went through the Depression. We didn't have the extra toys. We did have a bicycle and it was brand new at one time. I guess, I don't know what they probably 35, $40, but that was at making $2.50 an hour. That's money I knew was precious to my mom now that I didn't realize back then that the things she sacrificed just to give us. So there, like you said, there's no appreciation. My girls had a lot of things, not that they were spoiled, they had a lot more than I ever had. And I'm hoping their kids have more than they ever had. And you always want that for the future, but at the same time, those money values are important. And I remember my grandma, when I wanted money, I was 5 years old, she taught us how to get a stick because we had lemon trees in our yard, pick the lemons and sell them for like, little tiny lunch bags. 50 cents to the neighbors. And that's how I got money to buy 5 candy bars on a 50-cent bag of thing when candy bars were 10 cents back in the day. So I was taught
Nice.
those values. And to me, it was like the picking the cans was fun to get the sandwich. Picking the lemons was fun to go sell to the neighbors. So I was an entrepreneur at 5 years old and didn't even know it. So the things the older generation teach you are super important. And the
They
faith
really are.
and the faith my mother instilled us going to church got me through all those difficulties. And it wasn't a year after that husband died that my mother died, almost a year later. The difference between the two is the husband was expected. There was a ticking time bomb. My mother was out of nowhere. And that was a different type of blow. It was still sad. And yes, I'm an adult. My kids now at this age are, I think, 15, maybe 14, 13, 14. So they're understanding now what's going on. They're not 5 and 6 or 4 and 5 anymore. And it was just a couple of blows back to back for them as well. And they were close to their grandmother. She'd watch them when I go to work, getting them ready for school. And then I'd be there when they get home from school being a teacher. So that was a hard loss for them too, a year after their father, which was just unimaginable what they went through. I never lost it. My mom divorced my dad at 5, so I never knew what it was. He never came around, never supported child support, never called, never sent a card. So it's kind of like he was wiped off the planet. But when they have a relationship with somebody, that hurts more. So I feel for them that I don't know how, other than I know how I feel losing my mom, but it's not the same as losing a grandma and a father all within a year.
Yeah, I think, that's something that on my journey I've struggled with too. I lost my grandfather in 2020, I lost my son in 2022, and when you have those losses compounded like you're talking about, it's very, very hard to process them. And I think what's makes that hard is that every loss is different. It's not the same thing, and you're not going to have the same feelings as, grandpa passes versus mom. You're gonna have different feelings for both of those losses
Yeah.
individually.
And it
And
depends on the connection.
yeah, I mean, I like you said, my dad's never been in my life. I never have talked to him. I've never gotten a card, nothing, from day one, and so I don't have that connection there. So I mean, if he was to pass, is it sad? Yeah, but I don't have things there
Yeah.
to emotionally respond to, and that's where, I've seen loss so much in the grief community where when there's a big, strong emotional connection, and there's somebody there in your life a long time, and I think that's a real testament to the story about you and your first husband. Even though he pushed you away, even though he got really nasty with you, you still said, I'm here, death to it till we part, and I'm there. And I know you expressed you didn't know why when you were getting treated like that, but it was that you had made emotional commitment and you were in that marriage and they're permanent, and you know that regardless of what happens, this is my path. And I think that's really big and very honorable, because a lot of people, I've run across it in my history working in mortgages, that people see hard times like that and sometimes they leave, they just can't handle it and it's gone. And but there's people that stick around even in the worst of times, all the way to the end. And so it's a very personal, very individual journey, grief is, and I think that's why I enjoy having people like you on my podcast, because it's to celebrate each of those journeys, because there's something we can learn from all those grief journeys individually that may give us one or two things to inspire us to learn how to heal.
Yeah. I'd say, well, my pot of gold at the end of my rainbow, and the rainbow's a journey of going through everything you've gone through. My pot of gold is all the lessons I learned. I was a business major in college, but taught me nothing about personal finance. Got 2 teacher credentials, taught me nothing about finance. The last 13 years I taught before I retired, I taught personal finance, and I was like in heaven. I was still struggling at the beginning, and I learned a couple of things. I bought disability insurance I didn't know about before from teaching the class, but that's probably about it. But just going to start building up my future. Like I said, when we got married, he worked for the phone company who matched 6% of what you put into your retirement account. Teaching, we didn't have that. At least I didn't realize my pension was that, but I didn't realize because it was nothing extra I was doing. So we put everything into his retirement account, which is what I didn't get. And I did not build up my retirement account. I had no safety net.
Mm.
We had maybe $1,000 or $2,000 in the bank. But when you're talking a $1,700 house payment, and back then beginning teaching, I was bringing home maybe after all deductions, maybe 1,400, you could see that I was short and it was difficult. So through that time, I learned a lot about budgeting. I started because I was a computer whiz type. I love computers. So I learned how to make my own spreadsheets. I listed all the bills and all the money, and I figured what I had. I learned what I had to cut out, what we could do, what we couldn't do. And that was a big process for me. And if I would have been smarter, I would have, if it was even out, that I don't even know because it was so long ago. I know there was computers, but I don't know if there was like blogging or like video sessions. I would have documented my journey to help other people along the way. So that never really happened that early. I went through all that. I got into like $7,000 of credit card debt just to put food and clothes, food on the table, clothes on the girls' backs, just to the bare necessities. And that $7,000 was almost half my income, my gross income. So I'm thinking that was like, you might as well just say I owe $1,000,000 to somebody. I saw no way out of paying it off. But then he died. And I hate to say this, but my ship came in. I actually started getting his Social Security, which helped me pay off that debt in about a year or more. I paid off that debt and then actually started saving and starting a savings account. And that's what started my journey to get me on the right track. And I actually had a cousin tell me that went through the same thing where her ex got control of the kids and then she got them back. She said, your kids are 14 months apart. That means in 14 months, once they turn 18, you're going to lose half of that income. And then the next 14 months, you're going to lose the other half of the income. You need to set yourself up for that. So that's when I actually started to learn to invest. And that's when these people would come into my school that were authorized by the district to sell their financial plans. Let's put 403Bs for us. Yes, we had a pension. Yes, I was forced to pay into it, but didn't realize because it was nothing I gave them. They just took it from your paycheck and then the employer paid the other half. So that was not money I ever could have touched until I was in my 60s. So nothing that could have helped me at my 40s or my 50s or my 30s. So the first guy that came by, I again pinching pennies, picking those cans. I gave him $10 a month, and he showed me that through the regular cost savings or whatever it was. I'm only going to lose like $7 out of my paycheck. So I'm like, that's a lot of money, for me right now. But I did it. And then a few months later, another dude comes along and I give $25 a month to his company. So I got $10 going here, 25 here, and then the story goes. Another guy comes and I gave him 50, but then I fell into another hard time. I don't know when about this time was, but I needed to borrow money and had nowhere to borrow it from and no way to borrow it. So the first guy I gave the $10 to kept in contact with me the most and built the best rapport with me that he helped me take the money from the other companies, put them into his company, and I borrowed against my 401k, which I never would recommend, but it's the only thing I had. I needed to borrow like $4,000 and I had nobody to get it from. So just learning those lessons, and I paid that back as quick as I could. I did not like debt. So the only debt I really had was the roof over our head. And it's just those lessons that taught me to be really smart. I taught myself how to invest. I started out reading Motley Fool articles. I joined the Motley Fool, a couple of
Nice.
their programs. Then a few years ago, I found this guy named Phil Town who learned how to trade like Warren Buffett does. And he talked about his story, which is really a cool story. I don't know if you have time for me to tell it or not. But anyway, he taught us through these free seminars how to trade like Warren Buffett, how to look at a company. So I started doing that. I learned how to do options trading. And then I just turned around. I might have put into my Roth IRA. Now that I'm maxing out, I'm like 50 years old now or something like that. At 50 years old, you can play what's the catch-up fund. So I was able to put 5,000 above and beyond the normal 30,000, whatever you could put into a Roth IRA, a Roth or 401k or whatever at the time. So I started being able to do that catch up. I'm still teaching summer school because I needed that extra five or whatever $1,000 in there. So I'm working now year round being a teacher. And after putting that money in there, I was now putting 5,000 into a Roth IRA on the side outside of the 403B. And I turned, I'm guessing what was maybe a total of $60,000, $70,000 I put in at 5,000 a year for several years into like over $500,000 just by learning how to trade and buy stocks. So I have that
Wow.
passion of going from but poor to owning four houses right now that I want to help other people either avoid the struggles I went through to see the light, see what's going to come if you keep on doing this, or to get them out of that hole. Like I had to scramble out of that hole and just have them have a brighter future. So that has become a passion because of the experiences in the school of hard knocks I went through, that I have empathy for people like that.
I
So
think that's a powerful perspective you just shared about having empathy for people, because I think that's a big part that comes out of grief. And I really want to ask you how, looking back right now, since you're on my podcast, you're telling your story, you've gone from the depths of emotional despair, massive amounts of grief, financial loss, rebuilding your life. You've gone through some major, major life course. And now you're in a place where you're financially sound, you're stable. And you've been remarried too, by the way. I remember you said you and your husband were celebrating Valentine's Day a little bit ago.
yeah, and actually we're going
Um,
to celebrate our 10th anniversary this summer. So it'll be my second 10th anniversary I'll be celebrating.
well, congratulations to you guys. That's
Thank
awesome.
you.
How, tell me this. How does it feel? You couldn't see this in the future way back then, but where you are today, what's that look like when you look back and you look at where you are today? Well, what's that look like for you? How does that make you feel that you survived?
When you're little, and this is before all this happened, and maybe even the beginning of my life with him, you never think you're going to be a millionaire. That's just for people that have bucks. that's not something you grow up thinking unless you're Bill Gates' son and you know it's just going to happen to you. But when you come from literally nothing and you're so humble, I still feel humble. I give a lot of money to my church. I support a couple of kids in Africa through my church, and I believe in giving and helping others just have a hand up in life. I've volunteered for coaching for a group called Women's Money Matters, which is for low income women back east. But so I did an online 10-week coaching commitment to this woman and helped her turn her stuff around. That I just want to pay it forward. I want to see people not suffer what I had to suffer. At least I can't take away the grief if they have the grief part, but I could take away the financial burden, because on top of the grief, when you had that financial weight on your shoulders, it was overwhelming. I never saw a way out. And to see where I'm at now, I guess you could technically call me, my net worth is a multimillionaire. I'm so humble. I'm like the millionaire next door book. People in my neighborhood would not know I'm a millionaire. I don't drive big fancy cars. I have no debt other than one mortgage on one of my rental properties. And to be that humble, I think it came from my upbringing. It's nothing that you go into. It's not like you're handed a golden spoon and you've lived the golden charmed life. I never had that. So that gave me that, being raised in church. I've got empathy. I've got passion. I truly care for people and want to help them. And I think everything I went through gave me more understanding, because until you walk in someone's shoes, like you said, you've had death, you don't know what it's like for to have a death in a family, no matter how how husband, spouse, brother, sister, mother, father, grandfather, you don't know what it's like until you're close to somebody to lose them. That I can now share my story of how it felt to go through that and help somebody through it. Say, hey, you know what? Counseling helped us. It didn't solve the end result, but it helped us going through it a little at a time. The same thing with the money. I've sought out financial help. I was too proud to ever go to church to ask for help. So I just made it work. I did what I could to make it work. And I think through those hard struggles, and looking back, my mom had a hell of a hard struggle being a, Hispanic house cleaner, making $2.50 an hour, trying to raise two kids. Thank God she didn't have a house payment. But I think the people that struggle more have more compassion, and especially when they come out of it, to want to help others. And even if they don't come out of it, my mom never came out of it, but she always would give the shirt off her back. And I think it was being raised like that that helped me be now compassionate and so forth, and just humble to want to continue to help other people in different ways that I can. So after I retired, thinking I'm, living the life now, I travel the world, I thought, something's missing. I still want to help people like I did in that low income school I worked at, to help these kids get out of that stigmatism. And I've had those kids that they've been able to, within a couple, 3 years out of high school, start their own businesses because they had to write a business plan in my class. But they did that. They ventured on them. They actually bought houses for their family to live in, out of the how of, 4 or 5 families living in one tiny little roof somewhere. So just anything I can sprinkle my little golden pixie dust anywhere, I like to do that. So I started my financial coaching business, and I'm hoping to be able to reach more people through that.
I think that's a beautiful journey that you've been on, and I share that same sentiment too. I have a future dream to be a multimillionaire. It's one of my dreams, and I used to, as a kid, I used to be like, oh, I want the cars and the boats and all this crazy stuff. And what I can say now is one of my big missions I'd love to do, and it's going to take, roughly $1 million to do it. I want to actually go out and help people just like you, that are struggling in life and just lost their way and don't have a way out. They don't have an option, and nobody's giving them those tools and those resources. I'd love to be able to rally a community of people around that have different skills, like CPAs, hairdressers, dentists, people that can help people get back on their feet in the actual right way and give them that footpath to go forward in their own journey. And so that's my bigger mission in life beyond this podcast, is to be able to do exactly what you're talking about, is give back. Because the way that I'm glad we're talking about money today, because one of my biggest shifts I've had about money is I don't see money as some kind of status thing like a lot of people do. When I worked in mortgages, I'd always hear people, they would always talk about, oh, I made this much money this month. Oh, I'm on track to make this much per year. And I'm like, well, what are you doing with this? Like, it's a number. Who cares? And that's exactly right. I had so many people, when times were good, they were out buying big $700,000 houses and driving Porsches and all this crazy stuff. And when times
Lamborghinis.
got bad, they lost it all. Just what
Yeah.
happened. I was the opposite when I had months, when I lost my grandfather, I made 27 grand that month. And I can share right now that money didn't mean anything to me that month at all. It was just a number. Didn't care about it. But I put money aside all the time because I said life isn't going to be this good all the time, and there's going to be hardships all the time. So I said, maybe if I set all this money aside and I lived poor, which I loved it when I was making that much money because I had all this money in the bank, but I lived just like you. I drove a beater 15-year-old car. It wasn't fancy. It didn't, it had issues, but I got A to B, didn't matter. And what I learned about that too, though, that I really loved about having a lot of money was that when I did see people that needed help, I could help. I loved that. And
Yeah.
um, that's a big mission I have. I spent all last summer, by the way, when I was out walking, so I was in a city area, a little south of Tacoma, or Seattle, and we had a lot of homeless people and people that needed help. And I had so many good conversations with people, buying them lunch, buying them dinner, buying them something they needed in that moment. And it was so much more fulfilling than buying myself anything I needed. It
Yeah.
brought me a big sense of happiness. So I really love that you shared that today, that, yes, you've gotten to a place of very big financial success, but you're driven by your story and your journey to give back to people that don't have those tools and resources that you do. I think that is such a big testament to breaking the stigma around being a millionaire, being a stigma around money, that money's not the end all be all result. It's not the big goal. It's just a vehicle and a tool to get us where we want to go. And give us the ability, by the way, to help other people. I think that's a beautiful mindset you shared today.
Well, I'm glad I'm able to do that. I mean, I mentioned that I give a lot to my church and I support two kids in Africa that come from villages far away just to get educated. And they wanted to build a new school, so I donated a good chunk of money. I'm glad I was able to do that because I could have not done that 30 years ago, but I can do it now. I believe to spend your money on things, they don't mean anything tomorrow. Like if you have a rich kid that has new toys every week, the toys don't mean anything anymore. It's the experiences. So seeing the ducks, picking the cans to get the sandwich, going on the vacation and making a memory, sliding down that big old slide, making a fool of yourself in front of your kids. That's what they remember. And that's priceless. You can't put a price tag. And I know some people can't afford vacations, but I happen to own a timeshare at the time, so it didn't really cost me a whole lot. So I could do that. Now my vacations are nicer. Now I can fly business class on a long haul flight, like overseas or something. But it's the experience when we get there, just to see my husband see things he probably never would have seen. Um, and experiences he never would have seen had he married somebody else. I'm glad he picked me, but lucky me. But I just love making him happy, being able to have him be okay with me doing that. We're both retired now, but I make on my pension and my rentals more than he does, and I'm paying more than he does. But it's not about that. It's just about loving life together. So I'm looking forward to our vacation for our 10th anniversary. We're actually going back to Grand Cayman when we got married in the island of Grand Cayman in the Caribbean. And we're just going to go walk back on that beach and just kind of reminisce over the last 10 years, what brought it in. It seems like just 2 or 3 years. But we've had so much fun, so many vacations, and now we're taking so many more that I'm able to foot the bill for all this. I plan for it, and I believe it or not, being retired, I still set aside probably 30% of my income in savings, whether it goes to the vacation fund or the future car fund or the emergency fund. I've got it going places and helping things and having that money when the church needs something, or have been able to help somebody. I've put a daughter in one of my condos that can't afford rent, so we're going through her own divorce right now. Just being able to help, just with experiences of not having to have it, where am I going to make my next rent payment from? My daughter hasn't paid me this month's rent yet, but at least I can afford it. It's crimping my style, but I can afford it. You know what I'm saying? It's just about helping people experience life a lot less stressful than what they would have, maybe, and enjoy it a little bit more. Now, you mentioned the homeless person. This was years ago, but I was pumping gas when I lived in Orange County. And this man asked me for money. I said, I won't give you money to go buy liquor, but I will buy you food. I said, across the street, there's a place. So I said, you meet me there when I'm done pumping gas. I'll meet you and I'll buy you a meal. So I don't remember what restaurant it was, but he said, what can I get? Get whatever you want. So they had, how they have the meal plan, the hamburgers, frying the drink. He goes, can I get that? I said, of course you can. Can I get a shake too? Of course you can. So he got that and a shake, and I didn't say nothing. I paid for it. I walked out to my car. Some man outside says, I saw what you did. I go, what do you mean? Buying that guy a meal. I said, oh, I'd rather buy him a meal than give him money for alcohol. So I just did what I could do. And it made me feel good inside. Not that he recognized me, but that I helped somebody who I knew it wasn't going to drugs or whatever, homeless people, because they're not all bad, but that's what you think. So at least I know I fed him a really good meal and he had his shake and his drink and his hamburger and fries too. So it's just being able to do, picking cans. I could have never done it back then. But when you can do it and you help it, that shows where your heart is. And my heart is truly there to help people. And that's just all I want to do. And that comes from my mom, the art upbringing, which I'm glad I saw her get through hard times. I think that really helped me go through, excuse my language, all the crap I had to go through. I mean, it
Yeah.
was it was a freaking struggle. And I'm just so blessed. I look back now and I'm thankful for those times. It sounds stupid, but I'm thankful I went through that because it's shaped me to be who I am now, to want to help people suffering the same things.
Well, I think you went through such I mean, almost on the extreme end of grief, through that divorce, through that cancer journey, through the financial struggles that came after that, raising a family, in that tight financial place. I mean, you really got put through the ringer to this. I mean, I'm touching tip of toe around the iceberg there, but you really got put through the ringer and then some.
Yeah.
And to see that you've come out of that, by the way, not with anger or frustration, but come out of it in a place of, in your words today, humble, and in that place of I want to serve and contribute to other people. I think there's such a powerful message in that, that these worst circumstances of our life, the hardest challenges we face, the toughest things we get delivered on our doorstep, don't always have to be this big negative thing in our life that actually destroy us, but they can be the foundation blocks that create us. And I think your story you shared today is such a true testament of that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, a story I heard before, and this was through one of the things at my church at a whatever it was, but anybody can take their trials and be bitter because of it. Like, let's say, for example, a guy that was abused by his father and saw his father abuse his mother. He can grow up to abuse women, or he can change it and break the mold. A woman who is
Mm.
raped, that's probably the most horrible thing I can ever think ever happening to a woman. And I'm talking by a stranger, much less somebody you know, but a woman who is raped can close up. And if she's, like a kid or something, not a kid, but like, a teenager or just some trauma before you've ever got married, that could either make you hate the hell out of men, or it can give you a testimony. And the women that turn it into a testimony work at rape shelters to help people going through the same thing because they've experienced it. And I think that's the big, you've been in their shoes, you've walked in their shoes. I've raised kids by myself. I suffered a death of a husband. I've lost a mother. I almost lost a house. I raised kids on my own. I've been through it. So now I know how to get you on the other side of what I did. It didn't, like you lose when you gain, 50, 60 pounds, it didn't happen overnight. It came on pound at a time. And you're not going to lose it unless you have liposuction. You're going to lose it pound at a time. Same thing happens with money. You don't go into debt. Oh, my God, I'm $300,000. How did that happen? It just happened overnight. It was a series of your actions that do that. And to be able to turn you around and put you on the other side and see it a different way. Some people make emotional decisions with money instead of logical decisions. Um, I've probably made some emotional decisions, but I've never been to the point where I've had to flip it around. Um, and I've actually talked with a couple of friends about losing a parent because obviously I've been there. I lost my mother. In fact, I lost my mother and two uncles in 1 year. Every 4 months we had a funeral. So I have a compassion for people. So I know how to help them through things because I've been there. And like I said, your experiences, you can either be bitter or angry or use it to help people with it. And after hating people in my past for so long, that hate consumes you and turns you into a worthless piece of poop. That I learned to channel that. And it took a while. It didn't happen. It took me years to forgive my first husband for what he did to me. I mean, it took years, either for the emotional stuff or the money stuff or threatening me and the kids be homeless, which almost happened. It took years to stop that hate. And all it did was consume me. Once I was able to let that go, now I can be thankful for it. Well, yeah, look what it got me now. Look where I'm at now. It was a tough lesson to learn, but you don't know the other side of the rainbow where you're going to end up at. And I just want to help people see that rainbow is a journey and that pot of gold's at the end for them.
I love that, Kathy. That was so well said. I appreciate you saying that today.
Thank
As
you.
As we wrap up today, I always like to end my podcast on this note. What are one or two things you would share for somebody right now that is either going through grief and starting that journey, or even for somebody who's wanting to start that financial journey to get on that path of abundance? What are a couple things you'd share?
I'd say one simple thing is your circumstances or your situation do not define you. You define you. You could be but poor, but not be poor, if you know what I'm saying. Is just being humble and accepting your karma or whatever at the moment, but no situation defines you. You can hold your head up high, you can have a proud shoulder, and what you show people is what will magnate towards you. So that's the biggest thing right there, is don't let whatever you're going through define who you are, because it's not you. You make who you are. You have control of you. You can't control anything else, but you can control you, and that's the best thing you need to take away and learn. That just because I'm homeless, my husband beat me, doesn't mean you're going to always have to be beat up. Don't accept it. This is you now. You're not going to accept it anymore. Be different. Because actually, that was part of my past too from my last husband, but that's another story. But that's, you accept who you are and what you'll accept. And unless you set your standards higher, you're going to keep getting what you're asking. You're going to get what you magnate. So hold your head up high. Be the great person, because everybody is a great person. You just have to may have somebody help pluck it out of you. Oh, this is good. This is good. This is, look at you. Look what you've got. These are your blessings, and you didn't think they were blessings. And that's what I learned through counseling. My situations didn't define me. I could define me, hold my head up. And yes, somebody will want me with two kids. And sure enough, somebody did want me with two kids in high school or whatever, teenagers. Who wants the woman with teenagers? But it happened. My oldest daughter just remarried with three kids, you know, eight, like let's just say 18, 15, and 9. I mean, there's somebody out there that will love you for you. It's not the end of the world. You have to accept what you want and nothing less.
That is beautifully said. I appreciate you saying everything today to wrap up. This has been an awesome podcast. I got my brain moving right now because there's so many good things that you said today, and especially as we wrapped up here, those were core lessons. I hope that everybody that's listening to this episode today rewind the last 5 minutes of this, because this was very powerful, deep lessons, not just about money, but about life in general and about how to empower yourself to move forward. I just want to say, Kathy, I really want to say thank you so much for joining me today on today's podcast. It's been a real pleasure to have you as a guest today. For everybody that's listening today, I just want you guys to remember the Empower Grief Journey is about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. If this episode resonated with you, I'd like to invite you to subscribe by visiting my website, www.empowergriefjourney.com, and follow me on Facebook and YouTube. More importantly, please share this episode with somebody who may need it. You never know that you're not alone on this journey. Together, we can navigate grief, and courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself. Take your grief journey one step at a time. Kathy, I appreciate having you on the show.
Thank you so much. It was my honor and privilege. Thank you.